And let's stand together and I'll come back to this one, but this is what we're going to be doing, watching God at work again. But let's ask the Lord to bless us here.
Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above, ye heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost.
Okay, okay. This is where we'll begin. This is the last chapter of our study, but we will do the last portion of it next week because that leads us into Abraham. So we'll pick up there next week. But we're on the fourth of the big four events that I've been talking about that sort of mark why these chapters are so very important and why they're so such mountain peaks in God's word. The creation of the universe, the fall of humanity, the flood, and today we're going to talk about the tower. They're all important. Obviously, I'm not trying to rank them, but they need to kind of be like on a straight line, because Moses is saying, this is how we got here to Mount Sinai and why we're here and who God is and all of that. And he began with, he is the creator, he is the redeemer, he is the judge, and he's going to judge and do all of his providential work again on the earth. Do you have any particular thoughts or recall any things that you'd want to comment about or ask about all of the separations that happened that we read about in chapter 10? Because 10 and 11 really go together. What are your thoughts about chapter 10? Just take a minute and kind of look back, because we have the three sons of Shem and their descendants described in the days and weeks and months and years after the flood, and what happened before and sort of during and after the Tower of Babel, which we'll be talking about. What are your thoughts? Any thoughts that you have for?
I think it's amazing how well it's documented because of the long lifespans of the generation.
Yeah.
Very well documented.
Does that make you say, how did that happen?
Yeah.
There was no internet. There was no computers. There weren't even books that people could write and keep and pass on. So it was God's plan to make sure his people knew the story. So he preserved whatever records and documents and items needed to be preserved to tell that story. Doesn't that teach us something about who God is?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Verse 5 in chapter 10 says, from these coastlands, people spread in their lands, each with his own language, by their clans and their nations.
Yes.
And then 11, 1 says, now the whole.
Yeah. You notice that, huh? Because Moses does what writers are allowed to do. They tell the big story, and then they say, oh, and remember when I told you that during this person's lifetime, the earth was divided. And remember, I told you about this guy named Nimrod? Let's zero in and put the magnifying glass on that time. So 11 is a little piece stuck in to chapter 10.
So they're talking about a particular clan of people in 11.
It will be, but it's everybody to begin with.
It made me was, I never realized that in the beginning that the land was more or less all one. That
Oh, one continent, so to speak.
I never realized
Yeah.
that completely shocked me.
Yeah. And then the flood sort of tore the earth up.
Yeah.
That's going to happen again. The earth's going to get torn up all the way to nothing
Yes.
again. That also teaches about who God is. This whole thing is for us to know who God is and what he's done. So let's move on. And as Peggy noticed, I'm going to begin with that first sentence in chapter 11. Again, that's page 46. Now, the whole earth, this would be, can refer to the landmass, and it can also refer to the population that lived at that time. Earth in the Hebrew can refer to people, all the people of earth, or it can also, and obviously they lived someplace, gravity would hold them someplace onto the earth, so it could also mean the planet. But they carefully, he says, they have one language and the same words. Isn't that redundant? I mean, one language, does that mean you use the same words? There's always a reason why Moses does it this way and why it's explained and why God's word says more than you think it says until you stop and think and stop and consider and study it. One language, obviously, and let's just for our purposes, I have no knowledge that this is the case, but let's say they all spoke Hebrew. I kind of think they did, but I have no idea. I wasn't there. So let's say everybody speaks Hebrew. These would be the whole earth comprises at this point in time, all Noah, perhaps his wife, we don't know how long she lived. We only know how long he lived because that's recorded. All of his sons, they're as many children as were born up to this point, right? So a lot of people. They all spoke one language. Why? They got on the ark speaking one language, and they got off the ark speaking one language. It's the only language they knew. But over time, and I've just noticed this so much recently, especially as my grandsons grow up, but as I am around other people of different generations, let's say, they use words or phrases or things to talk about things that I have no idea what they're saying.
Yeah.
I need to Google everything these days. I sit watching anything on TV. I have my phone there and I'm Googling all the time. What in the world are they talking about? Because knowing what it means is so much more important when you're, even if you're speaking the same words. I mean, you hear words. I can't even come to right now to think of a word, which is kind of like, doesn't mean what you think it means. You know, they're fat. PHAT. Well, I know I am. FAT. How is PHAT good? It is generous, you know, well endowed, with things and stuff, whole different meaning, doesn't it? Well, these people had generations who began to express themselves using cultural related terms, things as in their lives that were different today than they were back when granddad was on the ark or great granddad was on the ark, right? So, and of course, the folks on the ark came off, they lived a long time. We know that Noah lived 350 years after the flood. We're told that. So, it's helpful to see what the literary artistry, narrative message, agenda of the author so that we understand something interesting happened in the past. Important for us to know. And also what it means as a window into God's purposes in the world. So we need to know. So, how come do we need to know about the Tower of Babel? That's essentially what that is. How come do we need to know that? Pardon? Well, it gives the biblical worldview of dispersion, but we have the evolutionist worldview of dispersion and everything in between. So we need to know what God says happened, not what people say, well, we think this is what happened because this and this we see, now, and that explains what happened in the past. No. Chapter 10, which we talked about, described what happened when Noah and his family left the ark and reestablished what we would call a civilization, a whole group of tribes of people by now, their families, clans, tribes, and nations. Unique in that verse until we get to Revelation. I can't get over the fact that those four terms are never used together again until the book of Revelation. So these bookends, 70 names are given to us. That does not mean that's all the people there were. There were a whole lot more, but 70 is the term that Hebrew people would use to say everybody or all of them. So, and we all descended, as we talked about last time, from the sons of Noah, and Genesis 11 tells us how this all happened to help us understand our world today. So the Ararat departure, we're told about that. They all got off the ark and they left the area of Ararat and migrated southeast to the lower Euphrates Valley. At that time was lush and green and fruitful and so forth. And then so we see that southeast, think about it. East, don't go east. Then it's come full circle from Eden to Babel. Both remembered for the expulsion of their residents in the story. So this is, as I said, everything's cyclic, and I gave you a chart that shows you how the cycle goes over and over, the patterns that are established in Genesis. We also have the generations, and we know that Noah was likely still alive when the Tower of Babel was built, according to how we reckon the time, and I'll go through that. According to Genesis, Noah lived 350 years after the flood, and his whole lifespan was 950 years, one of the longer living of the ones listed in the genealogies. This means he would have been alive during his great-grandson Nimrod's rise to power and the building of the tower. The population on the earth at the time of the Tower of Babel is difficult to pinpoint, precisely, of course, but most scholars, and I found a number so that I'm pretty sure about this, that they believe that there were in the thousands or tens of thousands, there may have been as many as 100,000 people on the earth at that time, based on the calculations from generations following Noah's Ark and the rapid population growth that would have occurred at that time period. they set out and they were to be fruitful and multiply, and they did it. And we know that God has in mind for those generations to be born. And so he would have facilitated that. He wanted that to happen for an explosion of the population. Now, I know you can't see this very well, but I want you to see how overlapping all these generations are, so that we have a clear passage of information, language, cultures, skill sets, all kinds of things from all these generations that build. Now, we think that the tower or the flood up here, let's do that one first. We talked about the flood first. The flood occurred, and I put it in our notes, and this is reckoning from the dates given in the scripture, about 1656 years from creation. 1,656 years between creation, or the records beginning with Adam, and the flood. And today we're going to be talking about the Tower of Babel, and that happened when Peleg, one of the great-grandsons of Shem, happened, and I'll get to that. And then we get all the way up in this chapter, but we'll break it down before then, to the birth of Abraham, and we have that to be about 1,950 years. So between the flood and the birth of Abraham is kind of the time period, but we're going to contract that a little bit to be between the flood and the tower. So the tower, this reckoning we can have, again, 1656 for the flood. The tower was built and the scattering occurred in 1757, or 1,757 years from the flood. Well, when you do that math, and you can get out your calculator, that's like just over 100 years, about 101 years or so of time that we're talking about here in chapter 11. From the flood, where all of these sons and generations began, to the Tower of Babel, the significant event that we're talking about in chapter 11.
1,757 flood, and then you're saying that from creation, right?
From creation to the flood. Oh, and to Peggy's question, why is it they talk about one thing in chapter 10, one thing in chapter 11? The reason is, in this section of chapter 10, we are given a sort of a carve out. Cush, the eldest son, we think, of Shem, Cush. So Cush fathered Nimrod. Doesn't mean it was his direct son. It can also, in Hebrew, mean a grandson. Sons and grandsons don't always translate directly. So he was the first on earth, as we read in chapter 10, verses 8 through 12, to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. It is always important when there's a carve out in a genealogy of a person and some stuff about that person, particularly significant about that person. The beginning of his kingdom, Nimrod's kingdom, was Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, and in the land of Shinar. From that land he went into Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah, Rezin. Between Nineveh and Calah, that is the great city. So there were two big cities in Nimrod's kingdom. Both of them lasted many, many years. Now, remember, we're at this point in the genealogy, somewhere around 60 years after the flood. Of that 100 years, about maybe 50 years has passed, not the whole 100 years. So let's look at the kingdom builder, Nimrod, because he's a carve out, and he is going to be referred to, or his kingdom is going to be referred to in chapter 11. So before we go on to the next verses, Nimrod is the fourth generation from Noah. His name means rebel. The carve out, or the verses that particularly spotlight him, call him a mighty man, a hunter, a warrior, a giant. I call him the Rambo of the Old Testament. King of Shinar, and that would be Hebrew for Mesopotamia. And the biggest city in Mesopotamia would have been Babylon. He's the builder of Nineveh and Assyria. And he's described as haughty before the Lord. So that's our guy Nimrod. I think he looks a little bit more like Conan or Arnold. We have the Hebrew word that Moses would have used to write the name Nimrod, which also means rebellion or rebel. And we also have him referred to as a mighty warrior and a mighty man, and that, remember, is Gibor. One who rules with violence, or a tyrant who kills without mercy. We've seen those since Nimrod. We've seen these kinds of people. So that would be the one. This is actually a stone carving that was dug up near Nineveh not very many years ago, like early 1900s, where huge mounds were opened around what is today in northern Iraq. Nineveh, the original city, and the writing called him Sargon of Akkad, which is one of the cities that is listed by Moses that goes with Nimrod. And Sargon is like Pharaoh or king or emperor or title, not the name. And Nimrod is, so he's a, good looking guy, right? All those curls and so let's move on. At one time, the people of the world spoke the same language and used the same words. We talked about that. And as the people migrated to the east, this is a New Living Translation, just to make it more readable quick. As the people migrated to the east, they found the plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. Started building their houses and their farms and so forth. Yes.
Amen. Is there maybe any connection with those angels?
Yes. In chapter 6, the Gibor is what the Nephilim in chapter 6 are also, that term is Gibor. Same word is used both places. It doesn't mean that his parentage was from the demons like it did in 6, because this is way after the flood. This is a human person, but he was very large and very powerful in his presence. So
Is a question, is the translation to the east or from the east? In the notebook, it's from the east.
I know, but that's the ESV in our pages that we're reading from in our book. But when you translate that in the ASV and the New King James, as well as the New Living Translation, it is to the east. I'm making the point because that Moses did. And we know which direction they got moved out of Eden from, right? And they went from the area of Ararat eastward. Now it's actually southeast, which on our maps, but they went eastward. And they found this plain, which is between these two mighty rivers. And I mean, it was the very place to be, because every civilization has had to settle near water, a good, big, clean, fresh water supply. So you can imagine why they would choose that. The problem is moving east is always the direction of exile, away from God. And we're going to see how that plays out in this chapter. It is the people who decide to move eastward. They decide to build a city and a tower. The folks who chose that direction, they probably weren't thinking, well, let's move east because we're going to be against God, but they did that, and that's what became the case later on. As they are trying to create a way to reach God in their own terms, and that's just a question. I don't know what they were thinking when they decided, okay, because this is a lot of people by now who are migrating. So they pack up their stuff and they move, and they're on their way. Just to see this place, this is a soldier in Iraq who had his picture taken right outside a big mound, which was called Babylon at that time in Iraq, in the same area. So, and that area is most likely on the east side of the Euphrates, but we don't know if this is one of many of the ancient ruins or another one, but I just wanted you to know there's not anything there. That's very impressive, is there? So, when they got to the plains of Shinar and began to settle down, they began saying to each other, because they can talk the same language, they all somehow agreed, let's make bricks. Never before this place in Scripture, never associated with a good thing after this. Let's make some bricks and harden them with fire. Well, I don't know how they learned or where they got that skill, but they figured it out. They probably saw the clay drying in the sun and realized it gets hard, and they figured it out. And in this region, bricks were used instead of stone, and tar was used instead of mortar. This is the New Living. The reason for it is there weren't any trees, no lumber. It's what there was. And they wanted something more than a tent. I would too. So they decided to build permanent kinds of buildings, and they built them out of bricks. And in order for these bricks to work well enough to be a structure that would hold up, they had to fire the bricks and harden them with the fire, and then use tar or bitumen, it says in some translations, to be the mortar. So, they said, we're going to make brick. Yes.
Is that the same thing that Noah used?
No.
To build the ark?
He used pitch.
Pit, which is not tar.
It's kind of like tar. Has the same purpose, but it's watertight. I guess tar is watertight, waterproof.
Doesn't pitch come from trees? They didn't have trees. Tar's
In the ground. It literally bubbles up in places on the earth today. The we'd call it crude. It's the precursor to the petroleum products that we have.
California has a tar pits, don't they?
Yeah, tar pits. They're around the Dead Sea, down south of the Dead Sea. They're all over the place in the planet, on the planet. They're not just one place. I guess it's stuff from under the earth that boils up like water does in springs all over the earth. Now, they've made a decision, let's make bricks. That's a permanent, we're staying here. Right? This isn't building a tent, and as soon as we find a better place, we'll pick up our tents and move there. This is, we're staying here. That's a decision they made together. Come, let us build ourselves a city. We're going to make all these bricks, and we're going to make houses that are fairly close together, and we're going to make a city. Put a wall around it. A city always implies that there's a wall around it to protect it from anybody who would come to try to take that city. Even Nimrod would have built a wall around his city because, you know, the game and king of the mountain is take the king off the mountain. So that's from the beginning. If you're on the mountain, the idea is somebody comes along and takes the king off the mountain and does it for himself. So that's the first thing. We're not only going to make a few houses for us to live in around here, spread out around, we're going to make ourselves a city. This is the second city recorded to be built. What was the first city to be built? Who built the first city? Who also traveled east? Chapter 4. I know that's like a long time ago. Chapter 4, who built a city and named it after his son? Cain. Cain. And that line kind of gives us what's the pattern. Choosing that we're going to stay here, and we're going to build a permanent place, and we're going to build a city. We're going to wall it off, and we're going to rule the world. And we're going to add a thing, a tower. In the ancient, that would be called a ziggurat. And we will go through that word in just a minute. But we're going to build a tower with this tower's top in the heavens. What's the purpose of that?
Reach up to God.
We're going to make a way from us to God because we think that's the only way he's accessible. Well, what did God say? Before that, you can't get to me. I have to come to you. You cannot get to me. But we're going to do it because we can. Let us make a name for ourselves. Everybody will know who we are. Does everybody in the world know about Nimrod and Babylon and Nineveh? I mean, if you have any education in history at all, you know those names, Babylon especially. Why are we going to do this? Lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. Read sometime Psalm 14, 1 through 3. I'll just tell you. God laughs at the plans of men. So they're setting about busy building bricks and building a city and a tower. Let us build in verse 3 is a blatant disobedience of the command that these three sons who are still alive now, and their father who is still alive now, Noah and Shem, Ham, and Japheth, all got, as soon as they got off the ark, What was that? Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That is, go everywhere, all over the earth. But verse 4 that we just read is a key. They aim to build a city. They aim to build a tower in that city that reaches to the heavens, and they aim to make a name for themselves, and they aim not to be dispersed over the whole earth. Would you call that God said this and I'm doing something different? Isn't that what Cain did? Isn't that what Adam and Eve did? Every time you know that God has said this, thus to be the case, and he says it to us in his word very clearly, do this. And we do different than that. It never is going to turn out, ever. It's going to turn out well. You can count on that. But they were going to try anyway. So the city and the tower are the outward expressions of sin. Disobedience, rebellion, sin. In this case, it's love of human praise and love of security. We're going to build a city and we're all going to take care of each other and be walled in, and we're going to be fine, and we're going to have this inside this city, we're going to have a tower that reaches to God, and everybody's going to know us. This is the opposite of God's purposes. We are not to find our joy in the praise of others, nor is it God's will that we find our security in the things that we can build. So this is directly oppositional. So this cycle, as I said, has begun again. Sin, grace, disobedience, forgiveness. We'll see that play out. The choice to disobey and God's consequences for that choice continue. Make a name for ourselves, just breaking out these phrases, become well-known or famous. That's what people strive for. I mean, anybody can make a name for themselves now, can't they? They just put it on social media and the whole world knows you. I am the greatest. I said that even before I knew I was. I figured that if I said it enough, I would convince the world that I really was the greatest. I'm not the greatest, I'm the double greatest. Not only do I knock them down, but I predict the round. Muhammad Ali. I'm the greatest. I can see Nimrod saying that. Not only am I the greatest, I predicted I'd knock him out by which round? I know so much. The motivation of building a city with its tower was to make builders a name, to establish world domination, authority, and power in God's place. City builders in Genesis start a pattern of people trying to provide their own deliverance and safety instead of trusting God. This is one of those patterns in the quilt of chapters 1 through 11. There are patterns all through this quilt put together to make this picture. Every time we see people trying to do for themselves, what happens? The object of this endeavor was evidently to establish a center by which the builders might maintain their unity, achieve godlike authority, and gain world domination with one world government. The defensive wall is a hallmark of a city. Cities in the ancient Near East were not designed to be lived in, but were intended for religious and public purposes. This is just historical, and just to kind of get off onto the towers and so forth. The Mesopotamian, that's still known as Mesopotamia today in some ways, that religion claimed that their cities were divine parentage. The little g gods were the ones who built these cities. The symbol of this obsession with divinity among the Mesopotamian was the ziggurat that was erected as early as the 3rd millennium BC, the 3000s BC, and that's where we are. It's actually 24 or something by now in BC time, BC. The ziggurat was a stepladder edifice made up of mud bricks whose bottom was square or rectangular, and the precise meaning of the structure is unknown, though it is widely agreed that it formed a stairway between the little g gods and earth. At the foot of the ziggurat, as well as the pinnacle, was a temple area, and it was serving as a habitation of the little g god. Let me just get rid of that so you can see the the ziggurats may have been considered an earthly imitation of the heavenly residence of the gods. So they came up with their own design, and that is like Babel, the city. The city of Babel later became the nation Babylon. You can hear that word Babel in Babylon. The connection or pattern is the key to understanding all of Scripture, all the way through Revelation, which is the last time we read about Babylon. This can open so much of the Bible before us because there are 3 times in the Bible which Babylon raises its ugly head. The beginning, the tower that we're talking about, in the middle of the Bible, the Babylonian exile, captivity of Israel. And the third is at the end, the final one world government that will be defeated in the end. You see the string or the pattern that goes through. The biblical records view this city as the predominant force in the world for the anti-kingdom. The epitome of ungodly powers, where the seed of the serpent would move with terrifying freedom. What the people considered their greatest and indispensable strength was their unity. Let us get together and build a city. God would easily destroy by confusing their language. What they considered their greatest fear, being scattered abroad, was forced upon them suddenly. What they desired the most to make a name for themselves, ironically, came about by receiving the name Babylon. What's the problem with humans in all these chapters? Disobedient, rebellious, going their own way, making a name for themselves, creating our own high place. The purpose of man's heart is to do evil all the time, Jeremiah writes. It would take a divine work of salvation to address all these problems. The whole of Genesis 3 to 11, which begins with the fall, it's a comprehensive diagnosis of what's wrong with the human condition. Disobedient, rebellious, and going our own way. Here's a ziggurat drawing. You can see that it's can you sort of see the pyramids in this? Because they are ziggurats of the Egyptian style. But this was more in keeping with the archaeologic ruins that have been found in that area. Lots of ziggurats, because every town had one. All over this whole area of Mesopotamia, every city, small city or town had one. Kind of like there's a church in every little town in America kind of thing. It was just part of, if you have a city, you got to have a school and you got to have a ziggurat. And this ziggurat was designed with staircases, specifically so that people could reach the top. And here's one that was excavated, and you can almost see those structures that were in the drawing in this obviously badly damaged thing. And there's people standing on top up there, if you can barely see up there. But this is what the Babylonians started. This kind of structure, which was mimicked, still is today in some places. But remember way back when we talked about the earth being divided, the atmosphere being divided, there was water, and then the earth was divided in with a firmament above, and there was the water above and the water below, and all of those things. That sort of idea, and above that was God, or where God existed. And so that idea still existed, of course, for these people. They thought if we can just get to the ceiling up here to that place, they didn't actually have satellites or anything to look through all that. So they built a structure that they imagined would get up to that place, and then they would get to the gods that they imagined. It's a man-made building of man-made materials, which means it's a symbol of their power and self-sufficiency. Some historians believe that Nimrod had an additional motive for wanting to build the Tower of Babel, to be a place for him to worship himself. I'm going to just bring this up, and I don't want to spend a lot of time with it because we don't have a lot of time, but I want to talk a little bit about how this man, Nimrod, had a wife and a son, which were considered little g gods after they built these cities. So, and it is the society of Satan was the Tower of Babel, is how the history should look at it. Here we see an organized rebellion against God for the first time. Like Lucifer, man would be God himself. Like the spirit of Lucifer, we see the thinking of Nimrod and his followers. Let us make a name for ourselves. People will worship us and think that we are great. In the climax of God's program, Babylon appears as the opposite of the city of God, the New Jerusalem. That's how it is described in Revelation. Babylon was the beginning of institutional rebellion against God and will continue until Jesus comes again and destroys it. So, New Age movement, which is present in our world today, trying to create a one world. They'll get their one world, and the one world ruler will be the Antichrist. And so Satan wants a one world, and so it's much easier for him to handle. What do we have now? Everything needs to be global. We need to move towards global everything: currency, language, trade, leadership, global. I guess Nimrod knew people needed a religion to overcome their knowledge of God. They needed a false religion to substitute for the true, and they denied the true God because of their unrighteousness. They denied the one true God. They created gods that accommodated their iniquities. People do that today, don't they? I'm going to go, I believe this, and so I'm going to find something that will support me in that. The Bible traces all false religion back to Babylon. Thank you very much, Nimrod. They rejected the true God, developed their false gods, and the Babylonian mystery cults came out of that, spreading all over the world. This is small, so let me just read. Today, present, and we saw that this week with the opening of the repaired and beautifully renovated Notre Dame, the Mother of God, the big cathedral in Paris that was built. I think 1,000 something it began. It's more than 1,000 years old, since it was begun. It was built specifically to be a place to honor Mary. This is sometime after the then already organized Catholic Church, Roman Catholic Church, because it's after the separation of the churches at the where Constantine divided the two to east and west because of the Nicene Council and all that, 350-ish AD. You can read all of that. The Roman Catholics began what is called a Mother Mary cult. Those of you who are Catholic in your background or know people who are Catholic know there is not a single Catholic church on planet Earth that does not have in the foyer or in the very prominent place a statue of Mary holding baby Jesus. That's everywhere everywhere. That came from something. That thought. Many Catholics worship Mary and pray to Mary because they believe that she is divine. That's what they're taught from their childhood. And we know that we are to only worship God, the triune God. But the background is the cult of Babylon, where these mystery religions didn't come from the New Testament when Mary was introduced. They're even in the day of Ezekiel, pagan false teachers were worshiping the Queen of Heaven. This was one of the visions that Ezekiel was given when he was taken to the temple in Jerusalem and saw in the vision what was actually happening in front of the temple, Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, before Nebuchadnezzar took it down. And they were worshiping what they call the Queen of Heaven. The astrology passed to the empire of ancient Egypt from Babylon, where it mingled, and Jeremiah speaks of it in respect to Egypt, mingled with the native animism and polytheism of the Nile. The pyramids were constructed with certain mathematical relationships to the stars, like many of the ziggurats were to the constellations. And they also honored the wife of the god Pharaoh in the same way. The Sphinx was an astrological significance. It had the head of a woman symbolizing Virgo, the virgin, and the body of the lion symbolizing Leo. Virgo is the first sign of the zodiac and Leo is the last, and that's how they calculate their periods of time of certain kinds of worship and so forth. So the Sphinx, which is incidentally means joining in Greek, is the meeting point of the zodiac first and last, indicating that the Egyptian priest believed the starting point of the earth in relation to the zodiac lay in Egypt on the banks of the Nile, the birth of the land of Egypt. Babylon the Great, the mother of all harlots and of the abominations of the earth. That's how Babylon is seen, as the mother of all religious abominations. Abominations. That's how she's described in Revelation. She is an abomination. The present day tradition of Mary Mother cult is anchored in this original Nimrod's wife and their son had ancient archaeologic ruins found and drawings that are found in China, in Mongolia, all over the world, where there is a picture of a woman holding a baby with in deified form in the way the pictures or the sculptures are drawn. So this is a worldwide cult of worshiping Mary. Semiramis with baby Tammuz is how Jeremiah refers to them as what passed from Babylon to Egypt and was the basis of the Egyptian cults. It's referred to in several places in the scripture as someone who worships the mother of the gods, because the gods were born of combination of angels or angelic or spiritual forces and humans. We saw that in chapter 6. So you can see how those kinds of things passed on. There is no queen of heaven. There never has been a queen of heaven. There is most certainly a king of heaven, the Lord of hosts. He alone rules the heaven. He does not share his rule, nor his throne, nor his authority with anyone. The idea that Mary, the mother of Jesus, is the queen of heaven has no scriptural basis whatsoever. Instead, the idea of Mary as the queen of heaven stems from the proclamations of priests and popes of the Roman Catholic Church. And what the Pope writes himself, encyclicals or whatever they're called, in the Roman Catholic Church are equated with scripture, as both are the same. Dangerous, dangerous thing. While Mary was certainly a godly young woman, greatly blessed, in that she was chosen to bear the Savior of the world, she was not in any way divine, nor was she sinless, nor is she to be worshipped, revered, venerated, or prayed to. All followers of the Lord God refuse to be worshipped. Peter and the apostles refused to be worshiped. Holy angels refused to be worshiped. There are verses which say, don't bow to me. I'm not God. You only bow to God. And the response is always the same. Worship God. Offer worship, reverence, and veneration to anyone but God is nothing short of idolatry. Mary's own words in her Magnificat that is recorded, and my spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. She never referred to him as any way husbandly or the mother of God. By the time Moses was teaching all of this history to the Israelites, he was also writing the book of Leviticus, and he included in the 19th chapter warnings, because this was still prevalent in the world. They'd just come from an idolatrous nation, Egypt, and all the nations of the world had their own little gods, and the land that they were going to had gods, Baal and others in Canaan. Do not turn to mediums or spiritualists. And that's kind of general. It would include those who read the stars. Do not seek them to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. Don't go near those deceivers. So he wrote stern denunciations, warnings to the people of Israel. Don't go anywhere near it. What happened to poor old Saul when the spirit left him and he was without Samuel, his mentor, and he was fixing to go into battle? Who did he conjure? He went to visit the witches. Sorry. The problem that we have here that started all of this disobedience, God had told them to not stay in one place, but spread out all over the earth, to fill the earth. So this is a direct disobedience of what God had commanded them to do. How often has God told us in His Word to do something and we do the exact opposite? Ask Jonah how this turned out. Consider whale insurance before you make that decision. My little brother always, I don't have whale insurance, so I'm not doing that. Here's the question all of us should ask ourselves. Is there any part of my life right now in which God has told me to do something, and yet I'm doing the exact opposite? Do you think the warning given to the Babylonians is any different than it is given to us? Absolutely not. So the two basic errors of mankind that we see in verse 4, the determination to get God by one's own works rather than admitting that it is impossible, and trusting in God to make entrance into His presence possible. In short, salvation by works is what that's called, trying to do it ourselves. The determination to glorify self rather than God, let's make a name for ourselves. These errors have marked mankind throughout history. Let's move on. But, a big but. Really big but. Because you think God's going to let this stand? We're going to openly defy what you told us to do and do what we're going to do. And God said, you think? Verse 5 and through 7, let's go through that. But the Lord, who's this? Capital Lord? Jesus. Jesus came down to look at the city and the tower the people were building. Well, now, do you think He hadn't seen that before and didn't see that big build all these years and years and hearing all this conversation about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it? So, as any Bible student should do, look up, come down, and look. Is this something? Come down, came down, came down. Is that any place else? That the Lord came down? Well, the next time He came down was to come to the now finished tabernacle. He came down and filled the tabernacle. So coming down is bringing His presence to the earth, or to the people of earth, because He's going to do something. And He's going to do something. And He did come down to the cross. So if you have to come down, where are you coming from? Obviously, which is heaven. So the Lord, who is of heaven, bothered Himself to come down directly to the city and look at the people. And He then, the Lord says, look, the people are united and they all speak the same language. Well, didn't He know that? Of course He did. So this is important for us to see the perspective that He is taking when He's beginning to do what He's going to do. So after these people come and build all this stuff, nothing they set out to do will be impossible for them. Does that mean no limitations on humans anymore if they continue to build a city? No. It's when they're united, whatever they set about to do is going to be a problem for everybody. So we need to separate this unity, because He says us. This is a threefold job. All three come down to do this job. Let us go down and confuse the people. Doesn't say anything about just spreading them all over the place like, he could have done. It doesn't say like, give them a plague and, then they, whoever survives, that's good. He's going to confuse with different languages. How unique. Who would have thought of that? Then they won't be able to understand each other. Yeah. Okay. So the plan is fix it so when people talk together tomorrow morning, when they get up and talk together, some will understand each other. Probably the ones who are in a household or in a small or in a family group will understand each other, but everybody else has no idea what they're saying or what you hear them saying. They become bewildered or perplexed. You can't understand it. Becomes life is really complicated when you can't communicate. Make embarrassed, unsettle, astonish, and confound are all the words I looked up for confuse. The Lord came down. This is the fourth verse of that second psalm I was talking about. He who sits in the heavens laughs, and the Lord holds them in derision. It must have been like, look at that. Look at the mess they are making. He allowed it to continue long enough so that they could see that this tower was being built, enough so that they could begin to use it or see how it would impact themselves and their culture. Then the Lord came down, was not to investigate something. The language was used to dramatize God's intervention. Moses used it, spoke it this way so that it'd be very plain. God showed up and did something. Every time we see God coming down, he does something. Every place, if you do a word search or a phrase search of came down, God's judgment at Babel not only dealt with the immediate sins, but also helped prevent future problems. Yes.
I think that, I don't know, maybe he came down so he could talk to some people and just.
He never talked to anybody.
He just.
No record of him ever speaking to anybody.
So he just.
Moses records a third-party conversation. He came down and acted. He didn't warn anybody. He didn't say, get ready, it's going to be a real different day tomorrow. Nothing. He didn't speak to anybody. God graciously spared their lives and gave them opportunity to return to him because he didn't destroy them. He could have. So then God says that language is the key to this rebellion. That's our problem. A single language left unrestrained. There's no barrier for a sinful heart. God says nothing will be impossible for them, meaning it isn't that men could accomplish literally anything. It means that anything man's sinful heart would propose to accomplish, together men would do it. If they were all unified and everybody did the same thing and could get everybody on the same page and moving in the same direction, all of their strength would go in that direction, and they were going in the wrong direction. God determines not to allow such a situation to go unchecked. Speaking in the plural, as the Trinity, as I said, the Godhead declares that he will confuse the language so that men will lose their ability to understand each other. Let's think about this. just let yourself think about this. You went to bed, everything's fine. Good night, family. And tomorrow morning, you're going to get up and go to work, building and doing your thing. Remember, there had to be enough going on in that city that the people who were building the bricks would be able to find food and clothing made, and the children were in school, and other things were going on so that they would have time to do this building. And somebody has to be out in the fields, somebody has to be taking care of the animals, somebody has to be making bread, so you have all the city doing all kinds of things that a city would do. And while they're on this building project of building this huge tower. So it's not like the only thing anybody's doing is building a tower. There's all city life is going on. Every kind of work that you can imagine would be necessary is going on. Yes.
At this time, Noah is still alive. He would have known what the earth was like before the flood.
Yeah. So would Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They were adults and married when they got on the ark.
I mean, the world was different. We didn't have that water above. So the picture showed, and maybe it's just a picture, it's confusing me, but the ziggurat shows them trying to reach that water above.
That's what they thought was still present. They didn't know it was gone.
I mean,
You are in the business of reaching God to control him. Get him to do what they wanted him to do, because that's what they thought they had to do. The little g gods are worshiping by doing things that you think will please them so that they will give you fertility or give you crops or save you from your enemies or heal you from your diseases. So you go and make these worshiping things to these little g gods to appease them, to get them to do what you want them to do. That was their concept of how you relate to God. Little g.
once they didn't inhabit inside the walls of the city, or did they?
Pardon me? Yes, that's how the city was built. All the people would live inside the walls. There would be work and things going on outside the walls, like the fields, and mining and, whatever work. They would go out of the city and into the fields and do things and bring that. But at the end of the day, they're all in the city.
So to,
Not all. There were probably some people groups living around, but not in.
so they weren't building the tower for big G God.
Oh, no.
They were for their little.
Only little g gods.
At this point.
Nimrod had rebelled against the God who sent that flood.
Yeah, so they just were like, oh,
And they're, okay, when we build our tower, it's going to not be floodable. It'll be tall enough to be above any potential flood.
so that's it.
But just think about getting up the next day. Suddenly words aren't words anymore. From their perspective, each person, nothing had changed. They could look at their neighbor and recognize their neighbor, who it was, but they couldn't talk to them, and their neighbor couldn't talk to them. They still speak and understand their own words. They probably didn't even realize that their own speech was different from before. They still form words and they still understand their own voice. This is a God thing. This is not understandable or reproducible. But as they speak, others show puzzled faces, then quickly looks turn to concern and then fear. I mean, how long would it take you to figure out something horrible has happened that we have no control over? How long? What is happening? And there's no one to say, okay, settle down. Here's what happened. And here's how we're going to deal with it. No. Do you understand the enormity of this? This is almost like the flood. Almost like the flood. As you desperately seek out someone you can understand, you stumble across an immediate family member, and with great relief, you realize you can understand one another in your family. Slowly, small groups of people with like languages would begin to collect and band together. Still without an explanation, our most important, I just want to understand what's going on. These bands like a language of like language stick together so some semblance of community is maintained. Some groups, I mean, little kids have to be still taken care of, and old people still have to be cared for, and all that. You still got to have some means of support and so forth. Small groups try in vain to bridge the communication divide, making hand signals and shouting, speaking slowly. Like if I were to land in Peking today, I would be totally unable to express anything I was thinking or ask anybody what's going on. It would be totally inaccessible communication. But soon they abandoned their effort, frustrated at the lack of progress and frightened about what the future holds. Work stops on the city. The purpose, both because of the language barrier and because shock and fear over their circumstances. How are you going to keep on with building a temple when the foreman is telling you to do something and you have no idea what he's telling you to do, and you become fearful? So what do? What God intended to do. You start migrating away from each other for safety, because when fear and confusion reign, much things are they're going to kill us, or they will somehow destroy us. I speak English, and Loretta speaks French, and Charlene speaks German, and we're all trying to communicate. We neither speak the other's language, or we're trying to communicate. I start wondering what's in Charlene's mind that she's telling me, and maybe Loretta understands it, but I don't and then she realized Loretta doesn't understand it either. So look at the massive panic and unrest and unsettling and fear. I can imagine. Building that tower is no longer important. They don't even see that that's what caused the problem.
And again, this is occurring the one language, because this is in one area. And then earlier when they talked about the different languages.
Sure. This.
In the earlier verse, because when Shem and
Before the tower was built, all the earth spoke one language. After God separated them, they went all in their directions to their own lands.
so that occurs after.
Yes. This is a little wedge stuck in chapter 10. Yeah.
That was God's plan to separate them.
Yes. That was his plan to separate. Scatter is the term best used. Scattered. I told you to spread out. You refused to spread out. So I'm going to spread you out. Because he's in control. I thought through this too, and I don't want to spend too much on rabbit trails, but from the day of Pentecost on, the church was being added to by people from all over the world and all languages and so forth. But they began to, they spoke common languages amongst them, in Greek or Hebrew or something, among them as well. But they tended to stay pretty close to Jerusalem because there was safety in numbers and there were, by comparison, fewer of them. So they kind of all stayed together. A few would have gone off after Pentecost and others, but they stayed for a long time together. And then Stephen got up and chided the people at one of the churches, and they stoned him to death. And the scripture says, the next chapter, great persecution spread over the church, and they were scattered all over the world. What did Jesus say? Go into all the world and preach the gospel. And they stayed in Jerusalem because that's a lot better than up there in Bithynia, up by the Black Sea. I have no idea how they speak or what's going on. I don't know anything. I'm staying here. God says, do it. If we don't do it, we reap the consequences. Sometimes it's harsh, sometimes it's not, but grief. I mean, God had to make every group of families, or perhaps tribes, at least 70 are listed in chapter 10, languages. Different, a lot different. It wasn't similar, didn't sound the same, totally confused. No control, no understanding, just happened to you. I don't think it's a coincidence that the world's moving back to a single language. Do you know what the dominant language in this world is now? English. Speaking of English. English. How did it get spread all over the world? The internet. How did the internet get spread to every nation on the planet? Cell towers are going up in Nepal, in the Aboriginal outback in Australia, every place. Cell phones. When he comes again, every eye will see him and every ear will hear him. They'll be on their stupid phone when it happens. Yeah.
The summer when we were in Africa, we were in the little tiny villages and the little tiny towns with the big cell towers. You know, no running water,
Yep.
but we had a cell tower.
You see? That's because if you have everybody in the same language in the same place, you can rule them. That's what Satan wants to do.
And you can even change your language on your phone.
You can have it interpreted on your phone, but it's interpreted from English. Today, business and the internet is making English the one language of the world again. And as the world begins to unite in a common language, it is no coincidence that sin is magnified. Well, hello, we should have seen it coming. I mean, we had all the worm. So let's move on. In that way, what way? He changed or confused their language. In that way, the Lord scattered them all over the world. They stopped building the city, you think? I mean, why stick here and build a city? Nobody understands me. I don't want to live here. This is why the city is called Babel, which was in its original Hebrew rendition means to babble. meaning when Loretta's speaking French and Charlene speaking German and I'm speaking English, when we talk, it sounds like babble to the other one. Suddenly separate and move off quickly in different directions is scatter. Scatter is sometimes used as a noun to refer to something that has been scattered, as Peter did in his first letter, when he addressed the people scattered all over, and then he listed all the cities where people had been, where the Christians, the church, had been scattered. So 1025 to Eber were born two sons. We're now moving the wedge a little further. Another little section was added in the 10th chapter, and there's this comment, to Eber were born these sons. The name of the one was Peleg, and in his day, he's named that because in his day the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. This is 100 years after the flood. That's not that long. Not that long. And it's within the lifetime of the folks who got off the ark. Noah lived 350 years after the flood. So this was only 100 years after the flood. So he lived to see this tower being built. So the crux of the whole chapter 11, or the first section of the chapter, one language and people, use bricks to build a tower with a purpose of unity and a name. God comes down to examine and to judge. God disapproves of the purpose, unity and a name. He unbricks the people, unbuilds them to many languages. So that's kind of the progression it goes through. It is no coincidence in Hebrew. Brick has these three NBL and disperse is IBN. Same three letters, just disperse or scatter. I'm sure it's a coincidence. This Toledot, or section or chapter or generation, leaves all the families on the earth hopelessly scattered throughout the then known world. And I underline hopelessly. This time there's no mark of Cain, like the first time they were scattered. To protect the dispersed people, there's no rainbow in the clouds to signal that the judgment was over. There's no token of grace given them for hope. But God chose one man out of this chaos of the bunch of thousands and thousands of scattered people to completely form a new nation. That's where we're moving. That's the whole purpose of seeing these first 11 chapters. This new nation will become his channel of blessing to the whole world. Perhaps the most obvious area explained by Babel is its origin, it's the various languages. And instead of language families of today trace back multiple unrelated parent languages, exactly one would expect, there is a parent language that is traceable back from every language on earth, and people have studied. I'm moving ahead because of time. When people considered their greatest strength and indispensable strength their unity, God easily destroyed that unity by confusing their language. And what they considered their greatest fear being scattered abroad upon them as they went their separate ways all over the earth, they feared that being separated the most, and that's exactly what they had to deal with. So they were confused and fearful, and the narrative provides a fitting conclusion for the primeval events of Genesis 1 through 11. It leaves the families of the earth hopelessly scattered throughout the earth. So the end of God's story then will be the crushing of the serpent's head. the original worldwide unity of Nimrod desired for the Genesis Babylon will one day be achieved by Satan's godless world system. Earthly Babylon is called a prostitute in Revelation, while the holy city of heaven is called the bride of Christ. So we see all through the scripture the battle between Babylonians and Jerusalem, the city of God. So, in all of this mess, what happened to Shem? He was the carrier of the blessing when they came off the ark. Remember all of that? We have a new genealogy, which begins in verse 10. And he begins this new genealogy with Shem. Well, we had some of his genealogy in 10, but he stopped with Peleg, didn't go in through that one, and went on through Joktan, which ended up with Babel. But we now have the rest of the story. Moses is going to pick up where he left off in chapter 10 with the generation of Shem and continue. But it's a genealogy just like 5. We read so-and-so beget so-and-so, lived so long, had children, died, so forth. And that repeated. But this one emphasizes life and expansion rather than death, even though longevity was declining. The genealogy starts with Noah's son Shem, whom God blessed, and it concludes with Abram, whose name was later changed, whom God proposed to bless. This is the line of Israel's ancestors, which was the purpose of Moses to tell them this story, who you came from, who you are. It's the vertical list of the type used in the ancient Near East to document legitimate claims to thrones or inheritances. So, the genealogies of Shem provide a narrative link between the story of the fall of Babylon and the account to call Abraham. So we finished this chapter. Again, we have the timeline. The incidents occurred about 4,200 years ago, 100 years after the flood. This was before ancient Egypt, Greece, any of the early civilizations. These places couldn't have begun until after the people left Babylon to establish these other generations. Now, I know you can't see this, but this is just these verses from 12 to 24, I think it is. And but I highlighted it with colors. These are the generations as listed. There are 10 generations from Shem to Abraham. And I wanted you to see, and he was 100 years old when he started having children. Then look, 35, 30, 34, 30, 32, 30, 29. Look at the ages of these generations, how it fell off from 100 years old after the flood. Arphaxad was 35. Huge. In chapter 5, they were like 130 when they started having kids or whatever. So it's amazing how they just drop right off. Now, Terah, who is the father of Abraham, was 70 years old. That was twice, but it may have to do with the fact that things were not going well in Ur of the Chaldees. It was one of the major cities that had a very large ziggurat completed in the years that followed, and they were an occupied city. And so Terah moved out to Haran, and we have that listed as well. So Shem's family will connect us with Noah's family, and then next to Abraham's. Noah and Abraham are 2 of the major characters in the story of God's plan of redemption. And then there's the straight line of blessing from Shem to Abraham. The original promise, a woman would bear a seed and he will crush the serpent's head. That was the original promise that came in the garden, that had to happen because God promised it. And he is faithful and he keeps his promises. So that had to happen. And we're on the way. It is carried through the family of Shem to Abraham. This genealogy, like all the rest, is to trace the seed line of the promise given in the garden. Who carried the promise? The blessing. Who carried the blessing? Who carried the blessing? Mary carried up to the end, and Jesus was the blessing. There are 10 generations, and you can list them there. It may not be all of them, but I thought, 10 generations from Adam to Noah, 10 more generations from Noah to Abraham. Probably means something. God's patience exceeds our own, and yet we can find patience by understanding and recognizing God's patterns from his word. Wait 10 generations. It'll happen if that's what God's plan is. You may have to wait 10 generations for it to happen. But it was 10 more generations. The lives of only 4 men link the beginning of time to Jacob, the grandson of Abraham, who had the sons that became the tribes of Israel, which would catch them up to the tribes that they were part of in the nation of Israel, sitting listening to Moses tell them their history. So he's catching them all the way up to their more recent, for them, the Israelis, this more recent history. You have Adam, Lamech, Shem, and Jacob. Lamech was the father of Methuselah. The father of Noah, excuse me. Shem was the grandfather of Peleg and Jacob. Each man in the list, and we had stories about each of these 4, each man in the list was still alive when the next man was an adult. Very key, because the blessing message or the knowledge that they had was passed from generation to generation in a very complete, not like telephone game where by the time you get to the end, you can't recognize the original message. In fact, Noah lived until Abraham's father, Terah, was alive. Sam and Eber outlived Terah. Eber outlived Abraham. So it wasn't haphazard. This was God's plan. Even though there are 20 generations that have to pass before Abraham comes. This list emphasizes the separating effect of God's seed promise. God is in the business of selecting who will receive his grace. God's seed promise is grace. He elects and brings certain lines. He elects to bring to certain lines of people and not to others. He chose which of these sons and which generation would carry the seed promise, the promise. And that choice is evident in the outworking of the events of their lives, and we have much of the details of their lives, several of them recorded. And it is reflecting of the genealogies of Genesis. That's why we have these genealogies, to confirm that a plan was set into place and fulfilled and carried through. So the central toledote of the book of Genesis is that of Shem. There are 5 toledotes before it and 5 after. That's sort of sections or stories, or in some cases, generation records. It serves as the turning point, the moment when God begins to move in the course of human history back toward himself. the first time we get a record of this is Seth. The third one listed in chapter 4, born to Abraham, to Adam and Eve, not his third child, but the third one listed. And what happened in his day? People began to call upon the name of the Lord. Same thing with this. This Toledot introduces the first of the patriarchs of Israel. Each of these men, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, will receive greater and greater revelation, information given by God concerning the promise to bring a Redeemer. It becomes clearer and clearer and clearer as the generations go by about what to expect, how to expect it, when to expect it. And each will receive a small portion of the promise of their earthly life. Yet, as we read, especially in the hallmark of faith in Hebrews, each man died looking forward to the fulfillment of God's promise in a future life. Didn't happen in their lifetime, even though it could have. It didn't happen in their, but they looked by faith for that promise to be fulfilled. Very important thing. What promise do we wait in faith on? He's coming again. He said he would. God said he would. Therefore, it will happen. So, some takeaway points about the spiritual meaning, perhaps. Pride and rebellion. Think about that. That's what got people into trouble from the very beginning. The people in the story aim to build a tower reaching to the heavens, signifying their desire to elevate themselves to a godlike status, little g God, against God's intended order. Confusion and disunity. God's response to their pride was to confuse their languages, preventing them from communicating and causing them to scatter, representing the consequences and the defying of God's plan and the breakdown of unity when people prioritize their ambitions. God's sovereignty, I should have probably put first because that's the most important. The story highlights God's power and authority to intervene in human affairs. He made us, and he can direct everything about us. He made the whole world and the universe. Everything is under his power, demonstrating that no human endeavor can succeed without aligning with his will. There was this big lesson in humility. The Tower of Babel serves as a cautionary tale. Well, those are messages. I might better look at them. Tell Cindy we're still meeting at Smiley's. You have our texter. She's been away a while, months. So, and she wants to be sure to thank you. Reminding people to remain humble and acknowledging their dependence on God rather than seeking self-glorification. God will humble the proud. And it was proud. We're going to build this thing and we're going to get up to heaven to God. Oh, no, you're not. All humans share in the image of God equally and are meant to be part of God's family. God told humanity to fill the earth by starting families, but instead they filled the earth with violence. God zeroes in on one family through whom he will redeem all nations once again. When humanity seeks unity apart from God, the result is violence and homogeneity. What we're seeing all over the planet today, violence, which the Bible calls Babylon. Unity on God's terms will produce blessing for all nations in the new Jerusalem. Many are the plans of the mind of man, the proverb writes, Solomon writes in his proverb, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. Whatever we learn from this is rebellion against what God says to do will destroy you. The sooner you get that, and all of us have to, and I'm a whole lot better than I used to be about this, but if I know he said to do that, I do it best I can. And there are times when a thought will come, I need to call somebody. I used to ignore those or put those off some years ago. I don't do that anymore. I believe that that is a nudging of the Holy Spirit saying, do this. And I have learned to put stuff down immediately and do whatever it is. Because, I'm doing something else and this comes into my mind that's got to means. It's so important to learn that lesson. So important. Just do what he tells us to do, and we will receive his blessing. Hey, Cindy, come on in. You're just in time. So we go from Babel to Pentecost, when the whole language thing was reversed and people could hear the gospel all in their own language. I had no idea what in the world kind of a song to go with this, but this is the one I chose.
Down from his glory, ever-living story, my God and Savior came, and Jesus was his name. Born in a manger, to his own a stranger, a man of sorrows, tears, and agony. Oh, how I love him, how I adore him, my breath, my sunshine, my all in all. The great Creator became my Savior, and all God's fullness dwelleth in him. What condescension, bringing us redemption, that in the dead of night, not one faint hope inside. God, gracious, tender, laid aside his splendor, stooping to woo, to win, to save my soul. Oh, how I love him, how I adore him, my breath, my sunshine, my all in all. The great Creator became my Savior, and all God's fullness dwelleth in him.
Just repeat from that. So, oop. Oh, escape. Show meeting. There we are. Cindy, come on up. I'm going to stop recording.